Morning of my son's wedding, I was supposed to be glowing. That's what everyone tells you, isn't it? That the mother of the groom gets to float through the whole day on a cloud of pride and champagne. I had the dress. I had the shoes, bone-coloured heels I'd broken in for 3 weeks around my kitchen just so they wouldn't betray me at the reception. I had my hair pinned up the way my son always said, made me look like a movie star, which was his way of being sweet without being embarrassing about it. What I didn't have was any idea that by 11 o'clock that morning, I would be standing completely still inside my own coat closet, one hand pressed flat against the door, barely breathing, listening to my daughter-in-law's voice on the other side of the wall. It was Iris who put me there. Iris had been with me for 9 years. She came to me after my husband passed, when the house felt about 3 sizes too big and I couldn't figure out how to cook for one person or remember to run the dishwasher or do any of the 100 small things Leonard had always quietly handled without my noticing. She wasn't just someone who cleaned my baseboards. She knew which mug I used for my morning coffee and which one made me feel vaguely sad because Leonard had bought it on a trip we took to Vermont the year before he got sick. She knew when I needed company and when I needed the house to be quiet. She had, without either of us making a big announcement about it, become one of the most important people in my life. So when Iris appeared at my bedroom doorway that morning, I was standing at the mirror doing my earrings, little pearl drops Leonard had given me on our 30th anniversary, and she had that look on her face. I stopped immediately. "What's wrong?" She didn't answer right away. She stepped into the room and pulled the door almost shut behind her, which she had never done before in 9 years. "I need you to come with me," she said quietly. "And I need you to not make a sound when we get there." I looked at her. Iris is not a dramatic person. She's the kind of woman who, when the pipe under the kitchen sink burst 2 winters ago, simply got down on her knees with a bucket and called the plumber without waking me up first. She does not panic. She does not exaggerate. So when she said those words with that particular expression on her face, careful, deliberate, a little pale around the edges, I didn't argue. I followed her into the hallway. She stopped at the coat closet near the top of the stairs, the one where I keep the winter things, the extra blankets, the box of Christmas ornaments I haven't had the heart to get rid of. She opened it just enough, looked at me, and said, almost without moving her lips, "I heard something. They're coming back through. Stay here. Don't let them know you're in the house." And then I was inside the closet, in the dark, in my wedding day heels and my pearl earrings, and Iris had pulled the door to a crack and disappeared. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds thinking I had lost my mind. And then I heard my daughter-in-law's voice. She was on her phone. She came up the stairs talking, not loud, not quiet, just the ordinary volume of someone who thinks they're completely alone. Her voice had that particular texture it got when she was being efficient, getting things done, moving pieces around a board. I had heard that voice before in the 3 years since my son brought her home. I told myself it meant she was capable, ambitious, that those weren't bad things. "He doesn't know anything about the trust structure," she was saying. "That's the point, the way it's currently written. If we can get her to add him as a co-trustee before the end of the year, then when she paused. Whoever was on the other end said something. "I know," she said. "I know it's not ideal timing. But she's 63 and she's healthy, and that's exactly the problem. We can't wait another 15 years for this to sort itself out naturally. The house alone is worth—" Another pause. "He doesn't need to know the details. He just needs to sign where I tell him to sign. That's always been how it works." I stopped breathing. I want to tell you I immediately felt rage. That's what you'd expect, isn't it? Fire. But what I felt first was something colder. A slow, terrible recognition, like when you're looking at an old photograph and you suddenly notice something in the background you never saw before, something that reframes the whole picture. She was talking about me, the trust, the house. 63, that's me. I turned 63 in March. And my son, my boy who called me every Sunday morning without fail, who drove 4 hours each way when I had a minor procedure 2 years ago just to sit in the hospital waiting room, who I had never in 34 years heard tell a lie. She was saying he didn't need to know the details. She walked past the closet door and into the guest room. Her voice faded slightly. I caught fragments. The name of my attorney. She knew my attorney's name. Something about a co-trustee amendment. Something about the real estate market in this county. I don't know how long I stood there. It might have been 10 minutes. It might have been 20. My feet were hurting in those heels, and my hand was clamped over my mouth, and I was doing that thing you do in a crisis where you focus on something completely ordinary. The smell of cedar from the hanging sachets, the weight of Leonard's old wool coat sleeve against my shoulder, just to keep from coming apart. When I heard the guest room door close again and her footsteps go back down the stairs, I waited another few minutes. Then I pushed the closet door open. Iris was in the hallway. She had been waiting for me, just standing there, hands folded in front of her, face completely composed, the way she always looked when she'd already decided what needed to happen next, and was waiting for me to catch up. "How long have you known?" I asked. She took a breath. "I overheard a phone call about 3 weeks ago. I didn't want to say anything until I was certain. This morning, I heard her on the phone again while you were in the shower. That's when I knew you needed to hear it yourself." I sat down on the hallway floor, just sat right down in my dress, in my heels, with my back against the wall. Iris sat down next to me without a word. We sat there for a minute. "The wedding is in 4 hours, I finally said. "Yes," she said. "My son doesn't know. I don't believe he does." I looked at the ceiling. There's a water stain up there from a leak we had fixed years ago. Leonard always meant to repaint that patch. I'd never gotten around to it. "What do I do?" I asked. I wasn't really asking Iris. I was asking the version of myself that knew what to do in situations like this. I was hoping she would show up. Here's what I knew. I was not going to ruin my son's wedding day. I was not going to walk into that ceremony carrying this like a grenade. Whatever she was planning, whatever the timeline was, she had said the end of the year. I had time. I would not blow up the best day of my son's life based on one overheard phone call. But I was also not going to let this go. I got up off that floor. I straightened my dress. I went back to the mirror and fixed my lipstick, which had somehow survived all of it perfectly. I put one more pin in my hair where it had come slightly loose. And then I went downstairs and had a cup of tea and acted for the entire rest of that morning as though nothing had changed. She came down 20 minutes later. My daughter-in-law, in her own getting-ready clothes, hair half done, asking me if the seamstress had texted back about the bustle, asking me if I knew where her something borrowed was. I handed her the small pearl bracelet I'd offered her 2 weeks before. My mother's, one I actually loved, and I watched her clasp it on her wrist and smile at me. And I smiled back, and I thought, I see you now. That afternoon, I stood in the second row and watched my son get married with my hands folded in front of me, and my face doing everything a mother's face is supposed to do at her son's wedding. He looked so happy. That part was real. Whatever else was happening, my son was genuinely, completely happy in that moment, and I was not going to steal a single second of it from him. The reception was at a vineyard about 20 minutes from town. Round tables with white linens, string lights, the kind of summer evening that makes you feel like the world is briefly being kind. My son danced terribly, the way he always has, with great enthusiasm and no rhythm, and I stood at the edge of the floor and watched him and loved him the way you love your children, completely, helplessly, in a way that has nothing to do with whether they deserve it. I drank 1 glass of wine and then switched to sparkling water. I was going to need a clear head. 2 days after the wedding, once my son and his new wife had left for their honeymoon in Portugal, I called my attorney. Her name is not Patricia. It has never been Patricia. It has never been Patricia. Her name is Vivienne, and she's been my attorney for over 20 years, since back when she was a junior associate and I was sorting out the paperwork after my mother passed. She knew Leonard. She came to his funeral. I trust her. The way you trust someone who has seen you at your most vulnerable and never once used it against you. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause. And then she said, in that measured way she has that I have always found more reassuring than any amount of reassurance, "How soon can you come in?" I went in the next morning. The first thing Vivienne told me surprised me. The trust, as it was currently written, did not actually allow for the kind of amendment my daughter-in-law seemed to think was possible. The co-trustee provision she had referenced existed, but it had limitations. My son could be added in a supporting capacity, but that would not give him or anyone else the kind of control she seemed to be describing. Either she had gotten bad information, or she was planning something more complicated. Either possibility was worth taking seriously. Vivienne and I spent 2 hours that morning going through the trust document line by line. By the time I left her office, we had a list of 3 amendments to make, not because my son's wife had frightened me into changing things, but because Vivienne pointed out, not for the first time, that there were some provisions that were already slightly out of date and should have been addressed a year ago. We were doing what we should have done anyway. We were simply doing it now. One of those amendments, at my direction, created a specific bequest, a fixed sum set aside, not part of the general estate, not subject to any future trustees' decisions, earmarked for Iris. Enough to matter, enough that she would know I knew what she had done for me and that I hadn't forgotten. I didn't tell her that day. I didn't want to make it about that. I just called her that afternoon and asked her she'd like to come for dinner that Friday. I was making the pot roast she liked, the one with the red wine and the rosemary, and she said she'd be there at 6. The harder question was my son. I went back and forth on this for 3 weeks. I lay awake some nights playing out every possible version of the conversation. I knew he loved her. I knew the wedding was fresh. I knew that if I came to him with this and he chose not to believe me, or chose her, I would lose him, at least for a while. And that was a loss I was not sure I could absorb cleanly. But I also knew that what I had heard was real, and I knew that whatever she was planning, it involved him being kept in the dark. And I kept coming back to the same thing: he deserved to know. Not because I wanted to blow up his marriage, but because he was my son, and he was a grown man, and he had a right to see clearly. He called me on a Sunday, as he always did. We talked for a while about the honeymoon, the food in Lisbon, an old bookshop she had found that he thought I would like. A day trip they took to a small coastal town where they'd eaten grilled fish at a table 10 feet from the water. He sounded happy. He sounded like himself. I waited until there was a natural pause, and then I said, "There's something I need to talk to you about. Not on the phone. Can you come by next weekend?" He came alone. She had a work thing, some conference, which I had not engineered, though I was grateful for it. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee the way we always had, the way we'd sat 100 times over the years to talk through the things that needed talking through. And I told him, quietly, as calmly as I could, what I had heard. The exact words, as close as I could remember them, what Vivienne had said, what I had done with the trust. He didn't say anything for a long time. I watched his face. I've been watching his face since the day he was born, and I know every version of it. I saw the thing happen that I had dreaded, that specific pain that comes from having your picture of your life suddenly not match the one you're looking at. It moved across his features like a change in the light. "Are you sure?" he said finally. "I'm sure of what I heard," I said. "I can't tell you what was in her mind. I can only tell you what the words were." He nodded. He looked down at his coffee cup. "She's always been—" he started and then stopped. Tried again. "She has a way of making decisions before I know we're deciding something. I thought it was just how she was, efficient." I didn't say anything. "I'm not." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know what to do with this." "You don't have to know right now," I said. "I'm not asking you to do anything. I just needed you to know. Whatever you decide, I need you to be going in with your eyes open." He stayed for dinner. We didn't talk about it again that evening. We talked about other things, the way families do when there's a large thing in the room that everyone needs a little time to walk around. He helped me with the dishes afterward, the way he had since he was 12 years old. He hugged me at the door for a long time before he left. 3 weeks later, he called me and asked if he could recommend a marriage counselor. Not for me, for him and his wife. He had talked to her. I don't know exactly what was said. He didn't share all of it, and I didn't ask. What he told me was that she had been defensive at first, and then, after a long night, had broken down, that there were things she was afraid of, financial things, security things, that had never made it into any real conversation, that she had told him she was sorry, that he didn't entirely know what to believe yet, but that he wasn't ready to walk away. I told him I supported whatever he needed to do. I meant it. I wasn't sure she deserved him. I wasn't sure forgiveness was warranted, or wisdom or weakness. But he was my son, and what he needed from me in that moment was not my verdict. It was my steadiness. Months passed. They went into counselling. I watched, carefully and from a respectful distance. There were Sunday calls that felt different, more careful, more deliberate, like he was paying attention in a new way. There were small things that shifted. She started calling me on her own occasionally, brief calls, nothing heavy. I was polite. I was warm. I was not naive. Vivian finalised the trust amendments in the fall. The bequest for Iris was in place. The co-trustee provision had been restructured in a way that was both cleaner and, I was told, significantly harder to circumvent. On a Friday evening in October, Iris came for dinner. Pot roast, the rosemary kind, with those little roasted potatoes she likes, and the green beans with the almonds. It was a good evening, easy and warm the way evenings can be when you've been through something together without having to say so out loud. We ate at the kitchen table and talked about her daughter's new apartment and the trip I was thinking about taking in the spring, and whether the hydrangeas on the side of the house needed to be cut back before winter. After dinner, over decaf, I told her about the bequest. I kept it simple. I told her what it was. I told her it was done. It was in the document. It wasn't going anywhere. I told her it wasn't about the money, or rather it was about the money, but that wasn't the whole point. The point was that I wanted there to be a record, something official, something that said in language that couldn't be ignored, this person mattered. Iris set down her coffee cup. She looked at me across the kitchen table for a moment. She has a particular expression when she's keeping herself composed, this slight tightening around the eyes, this deliberate stillness. She was doing it now. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," I said. "That's why I did it." She nodded once, carefully. And then she said, "Leonard would have liked knowing there was a plan." I'd not expected her to say his name. It caught me off guard in the best way, the way a good memory can, when it arrives without warning and turns out not to hurt the way you thought it would. "He would have made you explain the whole legal structure to him," I said, in detail, twice. Iris smiled. It's a small smile, very contained, the kind that means she's actually genuinely pleased. "He would have had questions," she agreed. We sat there for a while longer. The kitchen was warm. Outside it was dark, and getting cold the way October evenings do. That particular kind of darkness that feels like the year settling in. I thought about the morning of the wedding, the coat closet, my heels on the hardwood, the cedar smell in Leonard's coat, and the way I had sat down on the hallway floor in my good dress and not known what to do. I knew what I had done. I had paid attention. I had not panicked. I had not acted before I was ready. And I had not waited until it was too late. I had told the truth to the people who needed to hear it, and I had taken care of the person who had taken care of me. I had protected what mattered without letting bitterness make the decisions. I don't know how my son's marriage will turn out. I hope it holds. I hope she becomes someone worthy of him. People do change, sometimes for real, when given the right pressure and the right support and enough honesty. I am choosing, carefully and deliberately, to leave that door open. What I know for certain is simpler. I have a trust that says what I want it to say. I have an attorney I trust. I have a son who now knows to look clearly at his own life. And I have a woman who sat down on a hallway floor next to me without being asked, who waited 9 years to do the one thing that mattered most, who has a place in my will and, more than that, a standing invitation to Friday dinner and the good pot roast, and the table by the kitchen window where the light is best. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, quite a lot. I've thought a lot about that coat closet, the cedar smell, the dark, my heels on the hardwood, and Leonard's old wool coat against my shoulder. It wasn't where I expected to have one of the most important moments of my life. Standing in the dark in my good dress, listening to someone I had welcomed into my home describe me like a line item on a spreadsheet. But that's how it happened, and I think, in some strange way, it happened exactly the way it needed to. I don't believe the universe sends us tests as punishment. I don't think that, But I do believe that what we do in the hard moments reveals something true about who we are, and, more importantly, shapes who we're still becoming. What I did in that closet and in the weeks after was not heroic. It was just a series of small decisions made as clearly as I could manage under the circumstances. I didn't panic. I didn't retaliate. I didn't run into that wedding and make a scene that would have served no one. I waited. I thought. I moved carefully. That's the thing nobody tells you about getting older. If you've paid attention, you accumulate a certain kind of knowing. Not wisdom in the grand sense. I'm not claiming that. Just the hard-earned understanding that most crises do not actually require you to act in the next 5 minutes. That steadiness is not the same as passivity, that doing nothing while you figure out what the right thing is, that is itself a choice, and sometimes it's the right one. Iris knew that too. She had held what she knew for 3 weeks before she put me in that closet. 3 weeks of watching, making sure, deciding when the moment was right. That took something. A real moral backbone, a quiet kind of courage that doesn't announce itself. She could have said nothing. It would have been easier. What she did instead was risk the relationship, risk her position, risk being wrong, because she decided that the truth mattered more than her own comfort. I have tried to live that way. I don't always manage it. But watching her do it reminded me what it looks like when someone actually does. And then there was the harder part. Telling my son, I won't pretend I was certain it was the right call. I still don't know entirely. What I know is that I looked at the situation as clearly as I could, not through the lens of what I wanted, not through anger or fear, and I made the best judgment I was capable of. That's all any of us can do. Intelligence isn't about having the right answers before the situation arrives. It's about being willing to look directly at what's in front of you, even when it's uncomfortable, and think it through anyway. The outcomes are still unfolding. My son's marriage may hold, or it may not. Iris comes for dinner on Fridays. The trust says what I want it to say. These are not perfect endings. They are honest ones. That, I've decided, is enough.